He's just some old guy. What's he gonna do, sue us? That's what the HOA president sneered to her contractors right before they fired up the excavator and ripped a massive 6-foot-wide trench straight through my property. I'd only stepped out for 20 minutes to grab groceries. When I got back, the air stank of diesel and wet dirt. A massive trench now cut across land I'd spent 30 years turning into thriving wetlands, muddy water gushing everywhere, my carefully planted native grasses destroyed. She stood there smirking, clipboard in hand. "Emergency drainage, Ryan. Your little swamp was flooding our development. You just destroyed protected habitat. No permits." Her smile went ice cold. "Try me. Big mistake." She had no idea she'd just handed a retired Army Corps engineer with a very green thumb the perfect opportunity to teach her about environmental law the hard way. What would you have done? Drop your state? Has your HOA ever pulled something this dumb? My name's Ryan Hendrickson, 30 years protecting wetlands for the Army Corps of Engineers, and I thought retirement meant peace and quiet. Wrong. I'd moved to Willowbrook subdivision for the 2.3 acres of natural wetlands behind my house. Every morning, coffee on the deck, listening to red-winged blackbirds call while great blue herons fished in crystal water. The smell of rich earth after spring rains, soft squelch of boots in marshy soil, pure paradise. My wife Sarah and I had planned to retire here together. Cancer had other ideas, so I kept our dream alive alone, spent 2 years enhancing the natural habitat. Native grasses, wildflowers, perfect wildlife sanctuary. The ecosystem was thriving, property values climbing, neighbors loving the flood protection my wetlands provided. Then I met Karen Pemberton, real estate agent, HOA president, with a smile that screams, "I'm about to ruin your day." She knocked on my door holding a clipboard like it was Excalibur. "Mr. Hendrickson, your property violates community standards." "How's that?" "Unkempt vegetation, health hazard. This swamp needs to go." I stepped onto my deck, gestured toward the pristine wetlands. "Karen, this isn't a swamp. It's federally protected habitat that prevents your basement from flooding every spring. It's an eyesore attracting mosquitoes. It filters 10,000 gallons of water daily and supports endangered bird species." Her laugh was ice cold. "Read your HOA covenants, Ryan. We have authority over all visible landscaping." That's when I smelled trouble, and it wasn't the healthy marsh scent of my wetlands. I spent the next week digging through public records, found something interesting. Karen had a secret $2.8 million development contract with Premium Properties LLC. Luxury condos on community land backing up to my wetlands. One problem, nobody pays $800K for a condo overlooking cattails and bird nests. They want manicured lawns, not natural habitat. Karen needed my swamp gone. The harassment started immediately. Weekly violation notices for standing water creating disease vectors. Threats of liens for unauthorized water features. Emergency HOA meetings where she'd wave printouts about property values while neighbors nodded like bobbleheads. "Mr. Hendrickson's neglected property is costing everyone money," she'd announce, projector showing fake charts about mosquito breeding and home values. Most neighbors bought it. A few old-timers remembered when my wetlands were the subdivision's selling point, natural environmental amenities, according to original marketing materials. I documented everything, stayed quiet, researched property law, discovered my deed specifically excluded wetland areas from HOA control. Original 1991 subdivision plat designated my land as environmental buffer zone, permanently protected. But legal technicalities didn't matter to Karen. Premium Properties was breathing down her neck with daily phone calls. Construction financing required groundbreaking within 90 days, and she'd already spent their $400K deposit on God knows what. Her real estate firm was listing agent for the entire condo project. Millions in commission riding on this deal. The night before the trench incident, my mailbox contained her final ultimatum. Comply with emergency drainage modifications within 48 hours or face immediate HOA enforcement action under health and safety provisions. Translation, destroy the wetlands voluntarily or we'll destroy them for you. I knew she was planning something drastic. What I didn't expect was how spectacularly, criminally stupid her solution would be. See, when you've spent 3 decades prosecuting developers who illegally mess with protected wetlands, you develop a radar for environmental crimes. Karen was about to commit every federal violation in the book: Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, wetland destruction without permits. And federal environmental crimes come with federal environmental penalties that make HOA fines look like pocket change. The morning she fired up that excavator, Karen thought she was solving her development timeline problem. What she actually did was hand me enough legal ammunition to destroy her development deal, her HOA presidency, and probably her real estate career. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting your enemies dig their own graves. In this case, quite literally. The first thing I did was grab my camera. Not to cry over spilled milk, or in this case, spilled wetland, but because 30 years of environmental enforcement taught me one thing: documentation beats emotion every single time. I spent that Tuesday afternoon photographing every square inch of damage with surveyor precision. GPS coordinates on each shot, timestamps, soil samples in labeled bags. The trench was 6 feet wide, 4 feet deep, cutting straight across my property line like a wound. Century-old oak roots lay scattered like broken bones, their torn ends already browning in the afternoon sun. The smell of diesel fuel hung in the air, mixing with the sick sweet scent of churned earth and dying vegetation. I counted 17 different native plant species destroyed, including 3 that were on the state's Species of Special Concern list. While I worked, neighbors started gathering. The Kowalskis from next door, the Johnsons with their twin girls, old Pete Martinez who'd lived here since the subdivision was built. Jesus, Ryan. Pete shook his head. I remember when this wetland was the main selling point. Natural environmental amenities, they called it. What the hell happened? Asked Jenny Kowalski, her kids peeking around her legs at the muddy destruction. Karen happened. I filed the police report that evening. Property destruction, trespassing, violation of environmental protection laws. The desk sergeant looked bored until I mentioned federal wetland destruction without permits. Then he perked up. Federal? Like FBI federal? EPA federal. Army Corps of Engineers federal. I'd seen this before during my career. Developers who thought local politics trumped federal environmental law always learned the hard way that destroying protected wetlands triggers multiple agencies and can land you with $250,000 daily fines plus 5 years in prison. Next morning, I drove to the county planning office. Spent 4 hours digging through subdivision records, environmental impact studies, original development permits. The musty smell of old files and copy machine toner reminded me of all those legal battles I'd fought protecting wetlands from exactly this kind of illegal destruction. Found pure gold in a dusty file from 1991. The original subdivision plat clearly showed my 2.3 acres designated as Environmental Buffer Zone, Wetland Preservation Area. Not only was it outside HOA jurisdiction, but the county had specifically required its protection as a condition for approving the entire development. Better yet, a 1987 state environmental survey had mapped the original wetland at 12 acres before development. My property was just the surviving remnant of what used to be a much larger ecosystem. I drove home with copies of everything, feeling like I'd just found the nuclear codes. That's when Karen made her first counterattack. A certified letter was waiting in my mailbox. Notice of emergency lien, unauthorized landscape modifications. She was claiming that my restored native plants, the ones I'd spent 2 years carefully nurturing, constituted unpermitted landscaping improvements subject to HOA fines. The balls on this woman were incredible. I called her that afternoon. Karen, you just destroyed federally protected wetlands without permits, and you're fining me for growing native plants. Marcus, the emergency drainage was completely legal under HOA Health and Safety Authority. Your unauthorized landscaping violated community standards. Show me the environmental impact assessment for your drainage project. Silence. Long silence. We don't need environmental assessments for emergency health measures. You do when you are destroying federal habitat. Hope you've got good lawyers. Click. Wednesday evening brought the first surprise. My doorbell rang. Jenny Kowalski holding a manila folder and looking pissed. Marcus, you need to see this. Karen's been collecting special assessments for infrastructure improvements for 6 months, $800 per household. She handed me the folder. HOA financial statements, expense reports, contractor invoices. The crisp paper felt expensive against my fingers, but the numbers didn't add up. Where'd you get these? HOA treasurer's my cousin. She's been asking questions about where the money's going. Look at this. She pointed to a line item. Legal and consulting fees, $47,000. Another one. Engineering services, $23,000. All paid to companies I'd never heard of. Jenny, these aren't infrastructure improvements. This money went to lawyers and engineers for Karen's development deal. That's what my cousin thinks too. She says there's another $300K in assessments Karen's planning to collect next month. I spent that night cross-referencing the HOA payments with county business registrations, found that half the consulting companies were registered to the same address as Premium Properties LLC. Karen wasn't just stealing my wetlands, she was stealing from every homeowner in the subdivision to fund her development scheme. Friday morning brought the second surprise. My phone rang at 7 a.m. Mr. Hendrickson? This is Agent Sarah Bellamy, EPA Criminal Investigation Division. We received a complaint about unauthorized wetland destruction. Can we meet this afternoon? The familiar weight of federal law enforcement settling into a case brought back memories from my core days. Sometimes the government moves slower than glaciers. Sometimes they move like hungry sharks. Guess which one applies when someone destroys protected habitat to build luxury condos? Agent Bellamy looked exactly like you'd expect from an EPA criminal investigator. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and a briefcase that probably contained enough legal firepower to level a small city. We met at my kitchen table Saturday afternoon. She spent an hour photographing the trench damage, taking water samples, and documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this dance before. Mr. Hendrickson, this is textbook Clean Water Act violation, unauthorized dredge and fill operations in waters of the United States without permits. She closed her notebook with a decisive snap. Criminal referrals already in process. How long before charges? Federal environmental crimes move slower than we'd like, but this one's solid. 6 to 8 months before indictments, assuming your HOA president doesn't dig herself deeper. Famous last words. That weekend, I started my own investigation into strategic tree planting, called my old Army Corps colleagues, researched federal wetland restoration protocols, dove deep into environmental law precedents. Found something that made me grin like a wolf. During a Corps case in Louisiana, I'd watched a developer get completely destroyed when a landowner fought back with strategic tree planting. Bald cypress, red maple, and native willows weren't just pretty landscaping. They were legal landmines. Plant them in damaged wetland areas, and federal agencies had to respond to jurisdiction requests within 60 days instead of years for natural succession. The developer lost $12 million and got 3 years in federal prison, all because some smart landowner knew which trees to plant where. Monday morning, I drove to Morrison's native plant nursery. The smell of rich potting soil and greenhouse humidity brought back memories of weekend projects with Sarah planning our retirement garden. I need 200 native wetland trees, I told Morrison. Bald cypress, red maple, willow, fast-growing varieties. He raised an eyebrow. That's a serious restoration project. You got permits? Don't need permits to restore damaged habitat on my own property, especially when the damage was illegal to begin with. Tuesday, Karen escalated again. Another certified letter. Notice of code enforcement action. Unpermitted construction and landscaping modifications. Apparently, my plan to restore the illegally destroyed wetlands constituted unauthorized landscape construction, requiring HOA approval and city permits. The woman had brass ovaries the size of church bells. But here's where Karen's greed started working against her. That afternoon, Jenny Kowalski called with more financial documents her cousin had copied. Marcus, it's worse than we thought. Karen's been collecting those special assessments for 8 months, not 6. Total take so far, $640,000 from the subdivision. Where'd the money go? Legal fees, engineering consultants, environmental impact studies for the condo project, all paid to Premium Properties contractors and lawyers. She's been using HOA funds to subsidize her development deal. The bitter taste of corruption was familiar from my government days, but using homeowner fees to fund private development deals was brazen even by Washington standards. Wednesday brought my tree delivery. 200 young trees in biodegradable burlap, roots moist and ready for planting. The earthy smell of good soil mixed with the sharp scent of fresh wood chips had me grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. I spent the week strategically planting trees across the damaged wetland area. Each one GPS mapped, photographed, documented for federal review. Bald cypress along the water edges, red maples in the transitional zones, willows in the wettest spots. Every shovelful of dirt felt like loading ammunition. Karen's response was swift and predictable. Friday afternoon, 3 HOA contractors showed up with chainsaws. The metallic rasp of blade teeth being sharpened cut through the afternoon air like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Sorry, Ryan," the crew chief called out. Orders from the HOA president. These trees violate community landscaping standards. Touch one tree and I'll have you arrested for destroying federal habitat restoration. Lady says you don't have permits for tree planting. That's when I played my first card. Pulled out my phone, called Agent Bellamy's direct line with the contractors listening. Sarah, Ryan Hendrickson, 3 contractors just threatened to destroy federally documented wetland restoration trees. Could you explain the criminal penalties for that? I put the phone on speaker. Bellamy's voice carried the authority of 30 years of federal law enforcement. Destroying trees in an active federal wetland restoration investigation constitutes obstruction of justice and environmental destruction. Criminal penalties include up to 10 years in federal prison and unlimited fines. The contractors packed up their chainsaws and left without cutting a single branch. But Karen wasn't done. Saturday morning brought the biggest surprise yet, a sheriff's deputy with an emergency restraining order. Mr. Hendrickson, you're temporarily prohibited from planting any additional trees pending HOA review of environmental impact. I read the court order twice, then started laughing so hard the deputy looked concerned. Karen had just filed for an emergency injunction to stop tree planting on the grounds that my restoration was environmentally harmful to the community. Problem was, you can't claim to protect the environment while simultaneously facing federal charges for destroying it. Karen had just created a legal contradiction so perfect that even a first-year law student could drive a truck through it. She'd officially graduated from criminal to stupid. The restraining order turned out to be the best thing Karen could have done for my case. Within 48 hours, I had 3 environmental groups, 2 university research teams, and a documentary film crew asking for access to my property. Apparently, trying to legally ban wetland restoration while facing federal environmental crimes was newsworthy. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from State University's Ecology Department called Monday morning. Mr. Hendrickson, we'd like to conduct a formal biodiversity survey of your restoration site, pro bono. What's the catch? No catch. Karen Pemberton's legal argument claims tree planting harms local ecosystems. We want to document exactly how spectacularly wrong she is. Tuesday brought the first research team, 6 graduate students with clipboards, cameras, and enough scientific enthusiasm to power a small city. The crunch of gravel under their boots and excited chatter about soil pH levels reminded me of my early Corps days, when environmental protection felt like a holy mission instead of bureaucratic paperwork. They spent 3 days cataloging everything: water quality, soil composition, wildlife activity, plant species diversity. What they found made Karen's environmental harm argument look like flat earth theory. Mr. Hendrickson, Dr. Rodriguez showed me preliminary results Friday afternoon. Your planted trees have accelerated ecosystem recovery by approximately 400%. We're documenting species return rates that typically take 5 to 7 years occurring in just 6 months. The science was beautiful. My strategically planted bald cypress trees were creating perfect nesting habitat for wood ducks. Red maples provided songbird territory. Willows established natural water filtration that improved downstream quality for the entire watershed. But the real victory came in the mail Saturday morning. Official letterhead from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Preliminary determination. Waters of the United States jurisdiction. My tree-supported wetland restoration qualified for federal protection. The 60-day expedited review process was approved. Karen's development timeline was officially dead. That's when she went completely nuclear. Sunday night, someone tried to murder my trees. I discovered it Monday morning during my usual coffee walk. 20 of my fastest-growing willows showed signs of chemical burn, yellowed leaves, blackened bark, that acrid smell of herbicide damage that every environmental specialist recognizes immediately. Trail camera footage from that weekend told the whole story. Karen herself, dressed in black like some suburban ninja, creeping through my property at 2 a.m. with a backpack sprayer full of what looked like concentrated Roundup. The woman was literally committing tree genocide on federally protected land while under criminal investigation for environmental destruction. I called Agent Bellamy with the video evidence. Her response was immediate and deeply satisfying. Mr. Hendrickson, tree poisoning in federal jurisdiction is a separate felony carrying mandatory prison time. We'll have arrest warrants by Thursday. But Karen's midnight tree murder spree had an unexpected consequence. Wednesday morning, my phone rang with a call that changed everything. Mr. Hendrickson, this is David Martinez, project manager for Premium Properties. We need to discuss immediate project cancellation. Problems with your timeline? Our construction financing just got pulled. The bank's environmental lawyer says building luxury condos next to federally protected wetlands creates unlimited liability exposure. I could practically hear his sweaty panic through the phone. Plus, our insurance carrier found out about the criminal investigation. They've canceled our environmental liability coverage. Tough break. Mr. Hendrickson, this project represents $12 million in investment. We're prepared to offer significant compensation for development rights. My trees aren't for sale. We're talking 7 figures, enough to buy any property you want. I already have the property I want, with 200 federally protected trees and growing. Thursday brought pure schadenfreude. Karen Pemberton was arrested at her real estate office. Handcuffs, perp walk, news cameras, the whole 9 yards. The click of camera shutters and shouted questions from reporters sounded like justice being served at triple speed. But Friday morning brought something even better. A certified letter from the county district attorney's office. Not about Karen's criminal charges, something much bigger. Notice of asset forfeiture investigation. Willowbrook HOA financial irregularities. Apparently, when federal agents started digging into Karen's environmental crimes, they'd discovered her creative bookkeeping. 6 months of special assessments, contractor kickbacks, and developer payments that didn't add up to infrastructure improvements. $800,000 in missing HOA funds, criminal conspiracy, racketeering, wire fraud. Karen wasn't just facing environmental crimes anymore. She was looking at federal financial crimes that carried 20-year sentences. My trees hadn't just killed her development deal. They'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that was about to bring down the entire corrupt HOA power structure, and I was just getting started. The phone call that changed everything came at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. Mr. Hendrickson, DA Patricia Walsh, I need you in my office in 2 hours. Bring everything you have on your property purchase and HOA interactions. The urgency in her voice had my stomach churning as I drove downtown. Her conference room smelled like burnt coffee and late-night legal research when I arrived to find files stacked 3 feet high and 2 FBI agents taking notes. Marcus, your tree poisoning complaint opened a door we didn't know existed, Walsh began, her hands shaking slightly as she spread documents across the table. What we found is bigger than environmental crimes. She slid a thick folder toward me. Bank records, wire transfers, real estate transactions going back 5 years. Karen Pemberton has been running a criminal conspiracy using HOA authority to steal properties for developers. Your wetlands were supposed to be her biggest score yet. The numbers made my head spin. Karen hadn't just embezzled HOA funds. She'd systematically targeted 12 other homeowners whose properties blocked lucrative development deals. Harassment campaigns, fake violation notices, emergency liens, all designed to force owners to sell cheap and flee. Average profit per property, $400,000. Total take over 5 years, $4.8 million. My hands were trembling as I read the victim list. Elderly couple forced out by safety violations. Young family bankrupted by legal fees fighting fake assessments. Disabled veteran evicted for landscaping violations on a property he physically couldn't maintain. The most heartbreaking case was Margaret Bellamy, 78-year-old widow, Walsh continued, her voice tight with controlled anger. Karen filed 17 violation notices in 6 months until Margaret sold her family home for 60 cents on the dollar and moved to assisted living. That's when the rage hit me. Pure, white-hot fury that made my vision blur and my chest tight. This wasn't just about my trees anymore. How long has this been going on? We found the first case from 2019. But here's the beautiful part. Walsh pulled out another file. This one's stamped with federal seals. Every transaction crossed state lines, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, RICO violations. FBI agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Mr. Hendrickson, your environmental complaint triggered the largest homeowner association fraud investigation in federal history. Karen's looking at life in prison. But the real bombshell was in the original subdivision documents they'd uncovered. Your property research led us to this, Walsh said, producing a yellowed legal document from 1991. The original developer included a permanent protection clause for your wetlands that supersedes all HOA authority. I read the section twice, my heart pounding. Environmental buffer zone designated as Lot 23 shall remain under exclusive control of property owner, exempt from all homeowner association covenants, restrictions, and assessments in perpetuity. Karen never had legal authority to touch your property, Rodriguez explained. Every violation notice, every threat, every action she took was criminal from day one. The scope of her legal exposure was staggering. Environmental destruction, financial fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, RICO violations carrying life sentences. The federal grand jury convenes next week, Walsh said. We expect at least 40 criminal counts. As I drove home, the weight of it all hit me. Karen's illegal trench hadn't just destroyed my wetlands. It had exposed a criminal conspiracy that had terrorized dozens of families and stolen millions of dollars. My 200 trees weren't just growing in restored soil. They were growing in the ruins of a criminal empire that had finally collapsed under its own greed. Sometimes justice comes through federal environmental law. Sometimes it comes through financial crimes investigation. Sometimes it comes through both, delivered by trees that refuse to die. With Karen facing life in prison and my trees under federal protection, it was time to build something she could never tear down. I spent Thursday evening on my deck, bourbon in hand, watching great blue herons fish in the restored wetlands while planning the most comprehensive environmental fortress in suburban history. The evening air carried the sweet scent of blooming cattails and the distant sound of wood ducks calling to their mates, sounds that hadn't been heard here since Karen's excavator tried to murder my ecosystem. My strategy was simple: turn her illegal trench into an impenetrable fortress that would outlive every developer, HOA president, and environmental criminal for the next 2 centuries. Friday morning, I called Dr. Rodriguez with a proposal that made her laugh out loud. Elena, how would you like to help me create the most federally protected backyard in America? What did you have in mind? Endangered species habitat, wood ducks, migratory songbirds, native butterfly species. I want to add so many layers of federal protection that touching my property becomes impossible without permission from half the federal government. Marcus, you magnificent bastard, let's do it. Saturday brought my second tree army. 3 pickup trucks loaded with strategically chosen endangered species habitat. Swamp white oak for rare beetle colonies, black willow for threatened bird nesting, native buttonbush for endangered butterfly larvae. The earthy smell of fresh soil and root systems reminded me of planting Sarah's memorial garden, except this time I was planting legal landmines. Each species was a calculated weapon. Wood ducks meant Fish and Wildlife Service jurisdiction. Migratory birds triggered Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act protection. Endangered insects added Endangered Species Act violations. Karen would need federal permission from 4 different agencies to touch a single leaf. Sunday, I installed my surveillance network. Solar-powered trail cameras at every tree cluster, motion sensors connected to smartphone alerts, and professional-grade monitoring equipment that would make the FBI jealous. The soft click of camera shutters and electronic beeps created a technological symphony among the bird songs. If anyone came within 50 feet of my trees, I'd know within seconds and have video evidence within minutes. Monday brought my favorite addition, the educational infrastructure. Weatherproof signage explaining each tree species and its federal protection status. QR codes linking to environmental education websites. A boardwalk system allowing visitors to experience the wetlands without disturbing protected habitat. I was turning Karen's destruction into a living classroom that would educate thousands of people about environmental protection while making any future vandalism impossible to hide. Tuesday, I met with environmental lawyer David Bellamy, whose predatory grin told me he was enjoying this as much as I was. Marcus, we're filing for permanent federal protection under every environmental statute in existence, Bellamy explained, spreading legal briefs across his desk like battle plans. The sharp smell of fresh legal documents mixed with strong coffee created the perfect aroma of impending justice. Clean Water Act for wetlands jurisdiction, Endangered Species Act for habitat protection, Migratory Bird Treaty Act for nesting areas, National Environmental Policy Act for ecosystem preservation. How bulletproof is that? Interfering with your trees would require violating 4 federal laws simultaneously. Penalties start at $250,000 per tree and go up from there, plus mandatory prison time. What about future development attempts? Impossible. Your property now qualifies as critical habitat under federal protection. Any development within 500 feet requires environmental impact studies, federal permits, and congressional approval. Wednesday brought community weaponization. I organized weekend tree guardian volunteer shifts with neighbors. Families with children adopted individual trees, documenting growth and wildlife activity. Retired neighbors formed morning environmental education walking groups that provided constant surveillance while learning about ecosystem restoration. The genius was turning tree protection into a beloved community tradition. Karen's conspiracy had targeted isolated homeowners, but my trees were protected by 50 families who'd invested their time, energy, and grandchildren's environmental education in the restoration. Thursday, Agent Bellamy called with news that made my bourbon taste even better. Marcus, the federal grand jury added environmental terrorism charges for the tree poisoning incident, using chemical weapons against federally protected habitat. How much prison time? 20-year mandatory minimum for environmental terrorism, plus life sentences for the conspiracy charges. Conservative estimate, Karen dies in federal prison. And her co-conspirators? Premium Properties executives are looking at 20 to 30 years each. The entire development company is being liquidated to pay restitution to fraud victims. Friday brought national media attention. 3 documentary crews, environmental magazines, and cable news teams requesting access to film the tree protection success story. Mr. Hendrickson, this case is reshaping federal environmental enforcement, explained Sarah Martinez from PBS. Your restoration project has become the national model for fighting environmental criminals. Saturday evening, I walked among my growing forest. 200 trees that had started as saplings were now young giants reaching toward the sky. Each one represented not just habitat restoration, but legal protection that would last centuries. The soft hum of monitoring equipment mixed with evening bird songs while trail cameras clicked quietly in the gathering dusk. Karen's illegal trench had become the foundation for an environmental fortress that would protect this land long after everyone involved was dead and buried. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful that your enemies can never destroy. Karen's arrest should have ended everything. Instead, it triggered the most personal attack yet. Tuesday morning, I was sipping coffee on my deck when the acrid smell of chemical death hit my nostrils. 20 of my fastest-growing bald cypress trees were yellowing, their needles dropping like tears onto the soil Sarah and I had dreamed of protecting together. Someone had escalated from harassment to murder. Tree murder. Trail camera footage revealed 3 men in contractor uniforms working under cover of darkness, injecting concentrated herbicide directly into tree root systems. Professional equipment, systematic destruction, deliberate targeting of my largest specimens. The license plates traced back to Environmental Services LLC, a shell company registered 3 days after Karen's arrest to the same address as Premium Properties. Someone was still fighting this war. I called Agent Bellamy, my hands shaking with rage as I described the chemical attack. Sarah, they poisoned 20 trees, federal habitat, documented restoration, everything. Marcus, this just escalated to environmental terrorism. Coordinated attacks on federally protected habitat using premeditation and professional planning. Who's behind it? We're investigating, but Premium Properties investors lost $12 million when your federal protection killed their development. Some people don't accept defeat gracefully. Wednesday brought the second wave, and this one was personal. I woke to the sound of chainsaws at 4 a.m., not just cutting trees, they were destroying the memorial grove I'd planted for Sarah. 5 native red maples, each one marking a year we'd planned to spend in retirement together, now lying in pieces on the ground. The bastards hadn't just attacked my environmental restoration, they'd desecrated my wife's memory. This time, I was ready. Motion sensors triggered smartphone alerts the moment they entered my property. My neighborhood tree protection network activated like concerned family. 12 neighbors with flashlights, Jenny Kowalski live streaming on Facebook, old Pete Martinez blocking their escape route with his Buick. Hey, those are memorial trees, you sons of bitches. The contractors tried to claim they had emergency removal permits for diseased trees. Their permits were obvious forgeries printed on stolen letterhead. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 10 minutes, but the real satisfaction came when Agent Bellamy showed up with environmental crimes warrants. Attacking memorial trees in federal habitat carried enhanced penalties under federal law. The metallic snap of handcuffs echoed through the morning air as 3 more conspirators joined Karen in federal custody. But Thursday brought the attack that nearly broke me. Someone had vandalized Sarah's memorial marker, a simple granite stone I'd placed beneath her favorite red maple. Spray painted with obscenities, knocked over, the flowers I placed there weekly scattered and trampled. The smell of wet soil mixed with spray paint fumes created a nauseating reminder that some people have no limits, no humanity, no basic decency. I sat on my deck that evening, bourbon in hand, staring at the desecrated memorial and wondering if fighting this war was worth the pain they were causing. That's when Jenny Kowalski knocked on my door. "Marcus, we're not letting them win." She held a folder thick with signatures. "Every neighbor signed this petition. We're establishing a permanent community memorial garden around Sarah's trees." Behind her stood 15 neighbors, carrying replacement flowers, cleaning supplies, and a new memorial stone twice the size of the original. "This is our neighborhood too," old Pete Martinez said, his weathered hands gentle as he replanted Sarah's favorite daffodils. "They attack one of us, they attack all of us." And Friday brought the investigation breakthrough. FBI raids on premium properties revealed the full scope of their desperation. "Marcus, they were planning to bankrupt you with legal fees," Agent Bellamy explained during our meeting, the bitter taste of institutional coffee mixed with the sweet satisfaction of watching federal justice work exactly as designed. Frivolous environmental lawsuits, harassment campaigns, property damage designed to force you to give up and move away. How many other victims? We've identified 12 similar cases across 3 counties. Always the same pattern. Target elderly or isolated homeowners, escalate harassment until they sell cheap and flee. But the real revelation was in their internal communications. "They called you the tree terrorist in company emails," Agent Bellamy continued. "Apparently your federal protection case was inspiring other property owners to fight back against development pressure." My trees had become more than habitat restoration. They'd become symbols of resistance against environmental criminals who thought they could intimidate people into surrendering their property rights. Saturday evening, I walked through my memorial grove, now protected by community volunteers, federal law enforcement, and enough legal precedent to safeguard environmental restoration nationwide. The soft evening light filtered through Sarah's red maples, their leaves rustling in the breeze like whispered encouragement. Despite chemical attacks, vandalism, and corporate terrorism, they were growing stronger each day. 20 poison trees had been replaced by 40 new saplings donated by neighbors. The memorial grove expanded into a community garden. My personal fight had become a neighborhood environmental protection movement. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against environmental criminals is a community that refuses to be intimidated. In this case, that community had roots that ran deeper than any developer's greed. The final attack came not from criminals, but from corrupt government officials trying to cover their tracks. Monday morning, I was documenting new tree growth when a convoy of county vehicles rolled up my driveway. Code enforcement officers, building inspectors, and environmental assessors, armed with clipboards and enough bureaucratic authority to shut down a small city. "Mr. Hendrickson, we're here for emergency environmental remediation assessment," announced County Supervisor Bill Morrison, a man whose campaign contributions from development companies were matters of public record. "Emergency remediation of what?" "Unauthorized wetland modifications creating public health hazards. Your tree planting activities require immediate county oversight and possible removal." The smell of diesel exhaust from their trucks mixed with the sweet scent of my thriving wetlands created a perfect metaphor for corruption trying to destroy natural beauty. I pulled out my phone and called Agent Bellamy while they watched. "Sarah, county officials just arrived claiming my federally protected trees are a public health hazard requiring emergency removal." Her laughter was audible to everyone present. "Put me on speaker, Ryan. This is Agent Sarah Bellamy, EPA Criminal Investigation Division. Any interference with federally protected habitat restoration constitutes obstruction of a federal investigation and environmental terrorism. I suggest you leave immediately." Supervisor Morrison's face went red. "The county has emergency authority superseding federal jurisdiction." "No, sir, it does not. Federal environmental law preempts local authority. Touch one tree and face federal prosecution." The convoy left faster than it arrived, but their visit revealed something disturbing. Karen's conspiracy reached into county government. Tuesday brought the paper trail. Jenny Kowalski's cousin in the HOA treasurer's office provided financial records showing direct payments from premium properties to Morrison's campaign fund and 2 county commissioners. The corruption wasn't limited to HOA officials. County government had been bought and paid for by the same developers trying to destroy my trees. Marcus, this is bigger than we thought, Agent Bellamy explained during our Wednesday briefing. We're looking at public corruption charges against county officials who use their positions to facilitate environmental crimes. How high does it go? County supervisor, 3 commissioners, the planning director, and head of code enforcement. All received payments from premium properties in exchange for harassment and regulatory interference. But Thursday brought the breakthrough that changed everything. Federal intervention at the highest level. My phone rang at 7 a.m. with a call I never expected. Mr. Hendrickson, this is Congressman Patricia Valdez, chair of the House Environmental Protection Subcommittee. Your case has come to our attention. Congressman, your tree restoration project has become a national example of environmental protection success. We're introducing federal legislation based on your case, the Environmental Restoration Protection Act. The proposed law would create fast-track federal protection for private environmental restoration projects and establish mandatory criminal penalties for interference. Mr. Hendrickson, your trees are about to become the foundation for nationwide environmental protection reform. Friday afternoon brought the final federal hammer, a joint press conference announcing the largest environmental crime prosecution in regional history. FBI, EPA, IRS, criminal investigation, and federal prosecutors stood behind a podium surrounded by my thriving trees while announcing charges against 17 defendants in a multi-state environmental terrorism conspiracy. The crisp autumn air carried the sound of camera shutters clicking and reporters shouting questions while federal agents outlined a criminal organization that had stolen millions through environmental destruction. This prosecution sends a clear message, declared U.S. Attorney James Walsh. Environmental terrorism will face the full weight of federal justice. Karen Pemberton, 47 federal charges, life in prison without parole. Premium Properties executives, 20-30 years each for conspiracy and environmental crimes. County officials, 10-15 years for corruption and conspiracy. Environmental terrorism conspirators, 15 to 25 years for coordinated habitat destruction. But Saturday brought the most satisfying news of all. Marcus, the federal grand jury just approved our restitution request, Agent Bellamy called to inform me. The criminal organization is required to pay $15.7 million in environmental restoration damages. What does that mean? You're about to receive the largest private environmental restoration grant in federal history, enough to expand your tree sanctuary to 50 acres and establish a permanent educational center. Sunday evening, I stood among my 400 trees, 200 original plantings plus 200 community donations that had replaced vandalized specimens, each one now protected by federal law, community support, and criminal prosecutions that would deter environmental criminals for decades. The soft evening light filtered through leaves while automatic sprinkler systems whispered across healthy soil. Trail cameras clicked quietly, monitoring systems hummed softly, and evening bird songs created a symphony of technology and nature working in perfect harmony. Karen's illegal trench had triggered a federal environmental protection revolution that would reshape American environmental law and establish permanent protection for private restoration projects nationwide. My wife's memorial grove had become the cornerstone of federal legislation protecting environmental restoration from criminal interference. Sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful and legally protected that it survives every attempt to destroy it while sending the destroyers to federal prison for life. In this case, that something would outlive everyone involved by centuries. The ceremony that ended Karen's war came exactly 1 year after her excavator first violated my land. October 15th, 10 a.m., with federal officials, environmental scientists, and 300 community members gathered among trees that had grown from saplings into symbols of resistance against environmental crime. The morning air crisp with autumn promise, carrying the earthy smell of healthy soil and the sweet scent of native flowers blooming in restored wetlands. EPA Administrator Rebecca Martinez stood behind a podium decorated with red, white, and blue bunting, flanked by my towering bald cypress trees that had grown 4 feet in 12 months. Today we celebrate the most successful private environmental restoration project in federal history, Martinez announced to applause that echoed across the water. Mr. Hendrickson's tree sanctuary has become the national model for environmental protection through legal action. Behind her, news crews from CNN, PBS, and 3 environmental documentary teams filmed the ceremony that would establish legal precedent for private restoration rights nationwide. But the real celebration was watching Karen Pemberton's final humiliation play out in federal court. Live video feed from the courthouse showed her in orange prison jumpsuit, shackled hands, accepting a plea deal that sentenced her to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. 47 federal environmental crimes, financial fraud, conspiracy, and environmental terrorism charges. Mrs. Pemberton, your crimes represent the worst type of environmental terrorism, Federal Judge Patricia Walsh declared from the bench. You targeted vulnerable homeowners, destroyed protected habitat, and corrupted public officials in pursuit of illegal profits. The audience at my ceremony cheered as the judge continued. Your sentence reflects the severity of environmental crimes and serves as deterrent to anyone considering similar acts. Life imprisonment without parole, $15.7 million restitution to environmental restoration funds, and permanent prohibition from any position involving environmental oversight. But the most satisfying moment came when Agent Bellamy took the podium at my sanctuary. This investigation began with one illegal trench, she announced to the crowd gathered among federal protected trees. It ended with the largest environmental crime prosecution in federal history and permanent protection for private restoration projects nationwide. 17 defendants, $50 million in criminal fines, 300-plus years of combined prison sentences, complete dismantling of a criminal organization that had terrorized environmental restoration efforts across 6 states. Mr. Hendrickson didn't just save his trees, he changed federal environmental law forever. The crowd erupted in applause as Congressman Valdez approached the podium to announce passage of the Environmental Restoration Protection Act. Based on this case, Congress has established fast-track federal protection for private restoration projects and mandatory minimum sentences for environmental interference, Valdez declared. The Hendrickson Trees Protection Act will protect restoration efforts nationwide. But the most meaningful moment came when my neighbors took the stage. Jenny Kowalski, now president of the reformed HOA, announced the community's decision to dissolve the homeowner association and establish a conservation trust protecting environmental restoration in perpetuity. We learned that democracy works better than dictatorship, she said to laughter and applause. Community environmental protection through voluntary cooperation instead of mandatory compliance. Old Pete Martinez, now 83, planted a commemorative oak tree while children from 3 elementary schools sang environmental protection songs they'd learned during field trips to my sanctuary. Dr. Rodriguez presented scientific findings that made my chest swell with pride. My restored wetlands now supported 67 species, including 12 on the endangered species list. Water filtration capacity, 100,000 gallons daily. Carbon sequestration, 85 tons annually. Mr. Hendrickson's trees represent hope for private environmental action, Rodriguez concluded. Proof that individual citizens can create lasting environmental protection through legal action and community support. As the ceremony concluded, I walked through my memorial grove where Sarah's red maples now provided shade for dozens of families enjoying picnic lunches among federally protected trees. The sound of children's laughter mixed with bird songs while adults discussed environmental restoration techniques they planned to implement on their own properties. My trees had inspired a neighborhood environmental movement that would protect hundreds of acres from future development pressure. But the final satisfaction came that evening when I received a call from Environmental Justice magazine. Mr. Hendrickson, we're featuring your case as cover story for our annual environmental protection issue. Your trees have become symbols of successful citizen environmental action. What's the headline? How one man's trees defeated environmental terrorism and changed federal law forever. As darkness fell over my sanctuary, motion-activated lights illuminated walking paths while security cameras maintained vigilant protection over trees that had survived chemical attacks, chainsaw vandalism, and government corruption. Karen's illegal trench had become the foundation for permanent environmental protection that would outlive everyone present by centuries. Sometimes justice comes through federal environmental law. Sometimes it comes through community action. Sometimes it comes through trees that refuse to surrender to environmental criminals. In this case, it came through all 3, delivered with maximum legal penalties and permanent protection. 5 years later, my trees have grown into giants that cast shadows across an environmental protection movement spanning 3 states. The memorial grove Sarah never got to see now provides shade for the Willowbrook Environmental Education Center, where 5,000 children annually learn about wetland restoration, environmental law, and citizen action that protects natural habitat from criminal destruction. Walking through my sanctuary on this crisp autumn morning, coffee steam mixing with morning mist rising from pristine wetlands, I'm surrounded by the sound of success. children's voices asking questions about bald cypress root systems, the splash of great blue herons fishing in crystal water, and the soft whir of research equipment monitoring an ecosystem that has exceeded every scientific prediction for restoration success. My 400 trees, now 15 feet tall and still growing, filter 2 million gallons of water annually while providing critical habitat for 89 species, including several that have been removed from endangered status due to population recovery in my sanctuary. Property values throughout Willowbrook have increased 18% due to environmental amenities, flood protection, and the ecotourism that brings 15,000 visitors annually to witness successful environmental restoration in action. But the real victory is legal precedent that has protected environmental restoration nationwide. The Hendrickson Environmental Protection Act has been applied in 247 cases across 31 states, protecting private restoration projects from environmental criminals and corrupt officials who try to interfere with habitat restoration for personal profit. Karen Pemberton died in federal prison last year, her life sentence serving as permanent deterrent to environmental terrorists who think they can intimidate private landowners into surrendering environmental protection rights. Premium Properties, LLC, ceased to exist, liquidated to pay environmental restoration restitution that funded habitat protection projects in 6 states. Their former executives remain in federal prison with release dates in the 2040s. County officials who facilitated environmental crimes received 10 to 15-year sentences and permanent prohibition from public office. The corruption investigation led to complete reform of county development oversight and mandatory environmental protection training for all officials. The financial restitution Karen's conspiracy was forced to pay established the Hendrickson Environmental Protection Fund, which has provided $50 million in grants supporting private restoration projects threatened by development pressure or environmental crime. But my favorite legacy is personal: community transformation through environmental protection. Willowbrook eliminated its HOA and established voluntary conservation cooperation that has protected 400 acres of private land through conservation easements and restoration projects. Neighbors who barely spoke 5 years ago now coordinate weekend tree planting, wildlife monitoring, and environmental education that strengthens community bonds while protecting natural habitat. Jenny Kowalski leads the conservation trust that manages community environmental projects. Old Pete Martinez, now 88, conducts weekly nature walks for anyone interested in learning about native species and ecosystem restoration. The Kowalski kids, now teenagers, plan environmental science careers inspired by growing up among protected trees. Dr. Rodriguez established a permanent university research station in my sanctuary, generating peer-reviewed scientific papers that guide environmental restoration policy nationwide. Her students conduct thesis research on accelerated ecosystem recovery that has influenced federal environmental restoration guidelines. Agent Bellamy received promotion to head EPA Criminal Investigation Division, using experience from my case to prosecute environmental criminals nationwide. She credits my tree protection investigation with reshaping federal environmental crime enforcement. Congressional testimony about my case influenced $2 billion in federal environmental protection funding and permanent criminal penalties for environmental terrorism that have deterred countless attacks on habitat restoration projects. This morning, I received notification that my sanctuary has been designated a National Environmental Protection Landmark, ensuring permanent federal protection and educational access for future generations. Standing among Sarah's memorial trees, now mature red maples providing perfect shade for morning coffee, I'm surrounded by living proof that environmental criminals can be defeated through legal action, community support, and trees that refuse to surrender. The soft morning light filters through leaves while automatic irrigation systems whisper across soil enriched by 5 years of organic restoration. Bird songs mix with distant children's voices and the gentle hum of monitoring equipment that documents ongoing ecosystem success. Karen's illegal trench, long since filled and planted with native wildflowers, serves as a reminder that environmental destruction can become foundation for environmental protection that outlasts the criminals who attempt it.